What makes Hyperdemon thematically compelling? What kind of artistic intent can be drawn out of a game whose sole focus is gameplay? The answer is its feeling of joy. It's a joy that expresses freedom and fragility, a joy that's both thrilling and fleeting, a joy that overwhelms your senses with an overflow of dread and serotonin. Hyperdemon's thematic intent is exhilaration. Following up on Sorath's cult classic, Hyperdemon is the evolution of 2016's Devil Daggers, and on the surface, both titles share similarities in their structure. Hyperdemon is an arcade-style FPS where a player is tasked with reaching the end as fast as possible, to which their score is reflected on an in-game leaderboard. With a heavy focus on gameplay, Hyperdemon asks its players for mastery over a set of minimalist mechanics and overwhelming odds, where the end goal is providing an immensely satisfying experience. Play is everything in Hyperdemon. Its narrative is one that's written by player agency. Every decision made by the player is the pace that the game operates on. There is an intent behind the game, and understanding that intent is key to what makes it artistically captivating. This is where Sorath's two titles depart. In Devil Daggers, the intent was horror, and how it achieved that was through its presentation of death. The goal was to survive for as long as possible, but no matter how long it was, death was a certainty. As such, the horror revolved around the inevitability of death. In Hyperdemon, however, the intent is joy, and presenting that joy in a manner that's phantasmagoric. It's a bad fever dream that's overloaded in gaudish, loud imagery that quickens the senses to ludicrous speeds. There is horror to be found, yet the emphasis on joy draws the focus away from horror. Think of it in this way. If you've ever been to a theme park, there is a good chance that there'll be that one particular kind of ride that's touted as extreme, dangerous, only for the thrill seekers, and you, the oblivious thrill seeker you are, take up to the challenge. The shock is there, but somewhere along the various turns and bends, there's a moment where you let go of your anxieties, feel the wind in your face, and the serenity of the ride exhilarates you. That is Hyperdemon. What exactly does it mean to be exhilarating, and how is it the intended mood for Hyperdemon? To be exhilarating is to express a kind of joy that's exciting, thrilling, elated. It's the kind of joy that contextualizes the sheer intensity of Hyperdemon. One look at gameplay tells the player that at its best, Hyperdemon will have them zip around at breakneck speed, obliterating everything in their wake. It's a concoction of untamed chaos, one where a simple misstep will shatter you to pieces. Risk is intrinsic to playing Hyperdemon, but it is that sense of danger a player seeks, to push their limits and let the tumbling sense of exhilaration wash over them. These emotions are things only felt through gameplay, and the ability to express a specific kind of emotion through play is no small feat. There are many fine details that go into making a gameplay system engaging, with the end goal being that the player is in a state of mind in which those systems click. This is known as a flow state, an instance in which a player disassociates from their self-awareness of playing a game and where a game's intricacies are in sync. The proper term is referred to as cognitive flow and is coined by one Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. The Hungarian psychologist stated that flow is referred to as the relation between a person's skill and the difficulty of the task. When combining the two, it created different results of cognitive and emotional states. When both skill and task difficulty are roughly proportional, a person enters a flow state in which they have an intense focus on the task and an active sense of control. Due to the merge of action and awareness, there is a loss of said awareness, and the experience of time feels bent. The result is that the experience of the task becomes the only required justification to endeavor it. The challenge, however, comes from trying to find the right balance of skill and difficulty. If skill is low and the task is hard, feelings of frustration and anxiousness ensue. If skill is high and the task is easy, a person becomes bored. Before progressing further, it's imperative to highlight that Mihai's views on flow, particularly in their relation to labor, are troublesome. In his book titled Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, he writes, "To overcome the anxieties and depressions of contemporary life, individuals must become independent of the social environment to the degree that they no longer respond exclusively in terms of its rewards and punishments. To develop the ability to find enjoyment and purpose regardless of external circumstances." In another quote, shortened for brevity, "The best moments in our lives are not passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something different and worthwhile. It appears logical that the experiences we want can often have friction, and to overcome that friction in the process allows us to find joy in both the journey and the destination. Let's say I want to play a game which I knew I would like eventually, but dislike or even hate initially. I would want to force myself to push against that friction, with the end goal being that in reaching the point of enjoyment, I would enjoy the process itself. When considered outside of gaming, this isn't a healthy line of thinking. It insists that by disregarding my physical and mental well-being, I can use the process that doesn't fulfill my needs as a method of distraction or coping. That by losing myself in the process, I will be more productive and find the experience as a whole valuable because of that struggle. Now apply this thinking to work and labor, and we start to see the issue. We aren't designed to function like this, to slave away at a task that gives little, if any, gratification in the hopes of finding an optimal experience. In the Harvard article, A Critique of Flow, Ryan McCready writes, "In Csikszentmihalyi's 1990 book, Achieving Flow in Unideal Conditions, it is postulated that even those in forced labor or internment hold the ability to find the optimal experience via an achieved flow state. Challenge, adversity, and particular character strengths may give rise to either an individual immersing themselves into productivity as a means of distraction, a coping mechanism for a brutal situation. It is hard to imagine someone having the optimal human experience in an internment camp. It could be assumed that if flow conditions may be induced, that person could be manipulated into self-disassociative production machines of flow, no matter how grisly the circumstances. In fact, mental and physical well-being may be jeopardized should an individual continually invest energy into a job that does not fulfill genuine intrinsic motivation, even though temporary positive experiences may exist." With this in mind, if there ever was a context in which cognitive flow can be applied to discussion innocently, its use in the discussion of gameplay is perhaps the most applicable. Cognitive flow is a key factor to what makes Hyperdemon's themes of exhilaration fascinating. In order to create that sense of speed and fragility, there needs to be an approachable degree of ease and challenge, a sense of flexibility in contrast to overwhelming odds that put fragility into perspective. Hyperdemon is a title that wants you to think fast and act faster, to feel that chaotic mobocracy as you make swift decisions, all of which wouldn't be supported without the framework of cognitive flow. Much of Hyperdemon's thematic weight is contextualized by gameplay, so it's only fitting to now discuss the game itself. The easiest way of starting discussion would be to compare and contrast Hyperdemon with Double Daggers, and as a way to set a baseline, using comparison better articulates Hyperdemon's intent. However, we have to understand that Hyperdemon isn't a sequel or a spiritual successor, but a remix on the philosophy and approach of Devil Daggers. To go into detail of the various similarities is an exercise in tedium. With that being said, the question to ask is what's changed? The most applicable answer is a lack of rigidity. Devil Dagger's focus was on surviving as long as possible. As such, its gameplay design emboldened that slow, excruciating pace. These are aspects such as the need to collect a resource to level up in power, and emphasis on crowd control, and championing a method of play that requires proper positioning through movement. They're effective choices for Sorath to make, but they aren't perfect. The biggest complaint players may have of Devil Daggers is how exhausting it can be. The rigid slowness of gameplay leads to tedium, and a general lack of variety in approach means that while learning the game is engaging, The process of improvement becomes dull once a player understands the complexities of gameplay. When optimizing play for high scores, living as long as possible is vital, so flexibility becomes obsolete in favor of the best method of survivability. Hyperdemon's intent isn't on survival, but on speed. In order to encapsulate that, changes are needed to provide that experience. Sorath nailed it because they understood what elements of Devil Daggers were core to their specific style of arena FPS and accentuated them. Hyperdemon truly feels iterative on those core concepts, with a sharpness in design that really makes the most out of Sorath's minimalist approach, tapping into that daredevil sense of speed that leads to exhilaration. Returning to flow states, I mentioned how cognitive flow was intrinsic to what makes Hyperdemon thematically compelling, but I didn't specify how. Hyperdemon's answer to flow is dynamic difficulty. The goal of the game is to reach the end as fast as possible, where score is measured by how many points you tally up against a constantly ticking down timer. Points come from killing demons, and the faster you're able to, the higher your score will be. Demons spawn in waves, and how fast the intervals between waves are is dependent on the player's skill. While the game encourages speed, there is flexibility built around the player's approach. Hyperdemon will always operate at your specific pace, only going as fast as you can manage. This ensures that cognitive flow is as proportional as can be, maintaining the sense of exhilaration between players of differing skill levels. It's important for Hyperdemon to get difficulty right. The ebb and flow of gameplay revolves around the player's efficiency in navigating the play space. It's a sprint, not a marathon, and as such, Hyperdemon's various systems must be approachable in order to provide players a sense of tangibility in all the chaos. If we were to distill Hyperdemon into 3 core foundations, it would be movement, enemy prioritization, and efficiency. Movement is the backbone that carries Hyperdemon's gameplay, arguably the reason why it plays as well as it does. An important pillar of gameplay in Hyperdemon is being evasive, quick on your feet, not only as a method of avoiding damage, but as a means of destruction, as a way to close the gap. Moving around in Hyperdemon feels expansive, yet tight. Movement is built around a single action, the spacebar, and like with many other games, it's bound to jump. However, the spacebar also has extended functionality. If you tap space after an initial jump, you'll do a dash. If you choose to instead hold space, you'll do a dash that converts into a slide. If you're high enough in the air, you can choose to do a slam when pressing space without any directional inputs. Having all of your actions tied to a single button may seem like a bad idea, but the brilliance behind this is that movement isn't tied to a combination of different buttons, but on human intuition and feel. Having your sense of control be tied to how long you press the spacebar allows for the player to prioritize other important aspects of Hyperdemon, especially when it comes to interacting with other elements of gameplay. Aside from the pressure of time, enemy prioritization is a factor players need to consider when dealing with various demons. In the context of old-school style FPS games, the idea of enemy prioritization is often about assessing danger and prioritizing key enemies that pose the biggest threat. These games often feature a hierarchy of enemies based around their lethality to the player, and the key to victory is to eliminate that which is the most detrimental to player survivability. This line of thinking doesn't quite translate to Hyperdemon's hierarchy, as no one thing is deadlier than the other. It all depends on context. So how does enemy prioritization manifest? It comes down to 2 factors: the resource they provide and how much they clutter the play space. Ignoring the final boss, there's a grand total of 6 different enemies, all of whom offer resources that aid the player in combat, either as something physical or tangential. Referring back to movement, if we wanted, say, a speed boost of some sort, then the most likely candidate for that would be the Scuttle. These pests are common in gameplay, bugging the player through denial of space. To defeat them, a player must first damage them enough to stun the Scuttle. Once in this state, the player can then finish them with further damage. What can also be done instead is a dash slide into the Scuttle, both killing the demon and providing air acceleration. This isn't the only kind of interaction with enemies, each one provides a valuable tool in the player's arsenal. The key to gaining a high score is understanding which kind of interaction is the most efficient. This is what is meant by enemy prioritization. It's identifying which enemy type to focus on, and capitalizing on what they can provide. Efficiency is buried into Hyperdemon's DNA and is vital to gameplay, whether it's resource management, movement, or how to deal with enemies themselves. An extension to movement is one resource, but another comes in the form of gems. Briefly returning to Hyperdemon, gems were a resource vital to the game's rhythm of play, as it was the only method for the player to level up their power. As a result, it was incentivized to collect enough gems to scale in power alongside the progression of difficulty. In Hyperdemon, however, their role is changed to behave as a tool rather than a necessity. Gems have an expanded list of interactivity with the player, both active and inactive. They can be collected by the player to serve two different functions, either as a temporary buff to the primary firing mode, or as ammunition for the secondary firing mode, which functions as a railgun. Gem usage isn't solely tied to physical acquisition, they also interact with enemies. Gems are often a reward found from enemies, but perhaps their most useful comes in the form of large clusters. These pertain to the Nest, a spawner that creates low-level skulls whose job is to clutter the playspace. Players can either destroy them through weapon damage or use them as a platform for a speed boost. Destroying them leaves behind a cluster which has a variety of interactions. Either it can be broken to gain 3 gems, used as a shield to take a hit, or fired into with a railgun laser to create homing daggers which clear a small amount of space. If you are starved for something a little more chaotic, gems can also be consumed to turn into an explosive. The Spider is an enemy whose role is to deny the player access to gems, and they do so by magnetizing them for consumption. If they consume 3 gems, they leave behind a green explosive ball, which can be used in combat. These design choices effectively repurpose gems to be an extension of the player, relying instead on their ability to utilize them in any manner they deem fit. Hyperdemon isn't a game built around a hard-set method of play, but around a list of basic rules, and nowhere is that more apparent than with how players deal with enemies. You need only to look at the tutorial section to understand why. Aside from being an excellent tool for new players, it teaches you the do's and don'ts of each enemy. As long as those rules are followed, a player is free to tackle things in any manner they wish, allowing for a large degree of flexibility. The crux of Hyperdemon's excellence is in how all of these elements come together to create a lateral power fantasy, in which the playspace reacts to you. It's a dance in which the chaos you create leads to more chaos, and the decisions made between moments of combat allow for an expression of self that's tailored to your own pace. This power fantasy is exactly why the game is so exhilarating to play. It's an effective streamlining of gameplay systems that allow for flexibility in ways other FPS games don't, giving players the freedom to lean into the thrill of it. Undoubtedly, Hyperdemon's Brew of Frantic Chaos plays excellently. The question now is, how do you present that chaos aesthetically? Through a vibe that I'd describe as psychedelic fragility. Hyperdemon is an aesthetic built on glass and crystal, where things sheen, glisten, and entice. It's also an aesthetic that bombards you in visual effects which overwhelm you in phantasmagoric imagery that melts your skull and opens a third eye. Hyperdemon's visual presentation is the most immediate thing a new player will see, but by discussing gameplay first, we can easily understand how this aesthetic reflects the theme. The ferocity of the visual effects insists on something psychic. Its gaudiness creates a vibe of something eldritch and foreboding, as if we're experiencing something far beyond the limits of our brains. The glossy exterior, however, reinforces the fragility of self and the playspace we inhabit. The slight softness provided by how Hyperdemon is rendered allows for the game to emphasize how fleeting everything is. The world shatters in mere moments, or we shatter in mere seconds. Thanks to this visual contrast, Hyperdemon translates our thought processes during gameplay into a visual language. The daredevil thrill of speed is reflected through the overwhelming visual effects, balanced by their hazy, dreamlike quality of the soft, glassy graphics. Even with such evocative visuals, Hyperdemon still presents as readable, in a manner which both ties back into the aesthetic of the game and is useful. Take the minimalistic use of color. Its sparse use indicates vital resources, such as red for gems or green for explosives. When contrasted with a pitch-black background, it allows for the playspace to clearly contrast information betwixt itself. Visual effects are also used to convey information, such as the use of a piercing white glint that indicates danger. These attacks require a player to dash away, and if timed perfectly, it provides a moment of slow motion. This is both a release of tension and a reward, allowing for the player to take a moment to reassess their position and plan for it. Subtler forms of player information are present as well, the two of which being a rear-view mirror and a ghostly projection of enemies. One of the shortcomings innate to first-person games is a difficulty in perception. We are the point of view, and it is difficult to perceive that which is outside of our peripheral vision. For a game like Hyperdemon, this is a huge issue, and this rear-view mirror system aims to alleviate that. It works by displaying a red ghost image of what is behind us onto our screen, with distance being indicated by how strong the image is. This provides 360 degrees of peripheral vision at all times, allowing for the player to take note of the space around them and act accordingly. Similar in utility is the ghostly projection of enemies scattered around the arena. These indicate the next wave of enemy spawns, telling the player what is spawning and its whereabouts. Hyperdemon is a game about clearing waves of enemies as fast as possible, as high scores require a player to be consistently engaged in combat. Having this information provides even more flexibility to the player on how to approach the playspace. Perhaps I need to reposition, or there's a specific enemy that I want to prioritize. It all adds back to the myriad of ways in which Hyperdemon provides tools for players to clearly understand and engage with gameplay. The element that's perhaps the toughest to discuss is the game's audio design, not due to subpar quality in comparison to other aspects, but because so much of the thematics of Hyperdemon is found in its gameplay. Even still, there are plenty of smart ideas present that complement the overall aesthetic of Hyperdemon. Much of the pseudo-dreamlike quality of the atmosphere is reinforced through audio design due to how reserved it is. The softer approach to audio creates contrast with the exorbitant visuals, allowing for cohesion in the aesthetic. However, softness doesn't mean being safe, as there's plenty of harshness to be found in Hyperdemon's audio. The prominent use of glamorously enticing sounds is contrasted with those that are sharp and piercing, creating texture. These are gameplay elements such as the sharp white glint that indicates danger, or the cartoonishly sci-fi pew-pew of your laser. Audio effects are also used to enhance the mood of Hyperdemon, such as how audio enters in and out of gameplay. It feels entrancing, as if the walls of chaos that surround the player are washing over them, simmering down into nothing. This use of audio effects to enhance the mood is also found in the final moments before the boss encounter, where the player must fight with mass amounts of enemies. It starts with a whine, and continues to build, progressing further and further. The whining becomes omnipresent, until it cascades into ethereal white noise. As a whole, the audio design feels sensory, an appropriate tone that elevates Hyperdemon's Lovecraft-esque psychedelia. There is a sense that this thrill for speed is so forbidden, yet so invigorating that it taps into our inner psyche. It's brain-melting in the most exhilarating way possible. Hyperdemon is as pure a game can get, with its sole focus on being a playground for cathartically enjoyable gameplay. But that eagerness for play is what makes the game artistic, how it's able to weave all of its elements into one cohesive piece about the thrilling sensations of speed. It's a roller coaster ride that dares you to be a thrill seeker, and if it's exhilaration you seek, you may find yourself coming back for more.